Why do you say it's really mathematical? I've heard Arabic described as that. It's very logical.
You got
Yeah.
You
He's
got
a
the
mathematician, so
intrigue.
You got me going, man. What's up?
The way that you construct sentences is very structured. In English and Arabic, to a certain extent, you can move words around in a sentence a lot. In Turkish, you do that, you really mess with the meaning of the sentence a lot. And then furthermore, based on case endings to certain words. So, for example, in English, a lot of things that we say, that we add meaning to certain words is just another word. And then you can add another suffix onto the word that adds on possession, another suffix onto the word that adds on, that you're going to a particular place.
I got it. It's
Because
kind of like the foil method. It's exactly that.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Mad Mamluks. My name is Muhammad.
My name is Amir.
My name is Sim.
Today we have a friend, historian, and author of the book Lost Islamic History, Firas Alkhateeb. Firas holds a bachelor's degree in history with a concentration in Islamic history from the University of Illinois at Chicago. He is currently a graduate student in Middle Eastern Studies at University of Chicago, as well as studying traditional Islamic law and theology at Darul Qasim. Assalamu alaikum, Firas. Jazakallah khair for being here.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair for having me.
So can you start us off?
For us, we have a lot of questions for you, and I don't want to waste any time. A lot of people are having difficulty in understanding what's going on in the world, the Muslim world in particular. I know, just talking to my kids and my family, they have lost interest in just following politics and anything that's happening. And I feel like a lot of this problem comes from not being able to understand where the problem came from to begin with. When people want to evaluate the reality, they need to know the background of that reality. They don't just want to be presented something and want to make sense of it. They need to know some sort of a foundation behind whatever they're trying to examine. Or how does the normal Muslim, the regular Muslim who did not really pay attention in history class, and even if they did pay attention in history class, the Islamic chapter was usually 2 pages long in a lot of history books. They were literally, you saw this huge Islamic empire for a blip in a big history book. And usually the teachers I've had, they completely skip that chapter. How do we build this foundation of learning for history? Where does someone even start?
And let me just add on to that. A lot of times we don't realize that everything we have until now is because of history. It's a domino effect, and we are a part of one of the domino effects, right? One of the dominoes that are falling, right? And there's all of this history that occurred, and it brought us to this point that we're in right now. What is news nowadays is actually politics 100 years from now, or is history, even 10 years from now. It's considered, and it'll be written in history books. So how are they given, coming back to Sim's question, how do they...
Yeah, how do they start making sense of things? Where do they start from? Let's just say that somebody wants to make an initiative. What book do they pick up?
Just any book to begin with. I mean, first of all, we don't read enough as a community. As an American community, as a Muslim community, we just don't read as much as we should. We're not as well-rounded as we should be. But going off of what Sheikh Ahmed is talking about, there's something interesting that you see amongst historians and people who are studying history is that they'll pick a topic or a time period that they want to study, and then inevitably they end up studying the 100 years before that. So, for example, I had a professor when I was in undergrad that focused on World War I. And she said, but my original focus was World War II, and I was doing my PhD. And then I realized I can't understand World War II without understanding World War I. And that's the problem that we have a lot as a Muslim community today, is that we care a lot, which is great. We care a lot about what's going on in Syria. We care a lot about Palestine. We care a lot about problems in the subcontinent, in the Balkans. But the problem is that we have a knowledge of these things that really only spans our lifetime, if that. Right? We really want to solve the problems, but we have no idea where the problems came from. We don't know what the history behind it is. So that's something that, I mean, like you guys are both saying, this is something that needs to be addressed. The problem is that there's I want to say that there's a little bit of a divide between the academic history world and the lay people. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, of course. But academics kind of write in this, very high language and with a lot of assumptions. If you pick up a book written by a history professor about a particular topic, more often than not, if you're not an expert in that topic, you're really not going to know heads from tails. So there's this divide that exists. I don't know. Are you asking for like book suggestions?
No. I mean, what period? I mean, what like?
Okay.
Well, when I pick up a Islamic history book, I get lost from the names of Abbasids and Ayyubids and Seljuks and Ottomans and when a layperson is reading these terms, they're not exposed to these terms on a day-to-day basis. They're going to forget about it. Even if they pick up that book and read it from cover to cover, they're going to forget about it in a year because they're not normally or regularly exposed to it, you know?
Yeah.
So that's my big problem where I'm trying to teach my kids that, hey, we have to learn our history. And I'm teaching them something and they're forgetting even just where we started a few weeks later, you know?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You have to start with something that you care about.
Yeah.
Something that you really, really find fascinating. I mean, when I started getting into Islamic history, the thing that really stuck out to me is I started reading these books about Islamic scientific history and things that Muslims were doing in Baghdad and in Cordoba 1,000 years ago that are the basis of modern science. And I'm not a scientist or an engineer or anything like that, but it was just amazing that we have these notions of what scientific history is. Like you were talking about textbooks. Your science textbooks, when you're in high school, it talks a lot about the ancient Greeks, the ancient Egyptians, and then the Dark Ages. Not much is going on. And then all of a sudden the Enlightenment and the Renaissance.
Yeah.
And, there's a 1,000-year period in the middle that's missing.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And I kind of thought about it, and I feel like some of it is embarrassment for the Europeans. Do not want to talk about that Spain was ruled by Muslims for 1,000 years. And it was an amazing rule. Like, everyone got along. Christians, Muslims, people of all kinds of ethnicities. It was a beautiful time, and it's barely ever mentioned.
Yeah. And so I know that you have a really cool, in your outline we saw, and I would refer to that as a manual because it's a very easy way for someone to get into history, right? So would you suggest, even because, let me explain by saying, many people, they'll feel guilty of not studying Islamic history first because they're Muslim, right? But in your outline that I saw, it was really cool. You mentioned, you should start off with World War I and then World War II, and then move on, and you talked a little about Ibn Khaldun. We'll get into that. So what can we tell in just a little bit of time to tell to the listeners that you should, just understanding patterns in history, since you live in the United States, you should understand a decent amount of World War I, World War II. And the reason why I'm mentioning all of this is that when I would be reading some history books that weren't Islamic history, people would be like, oh my God, you're reading history. You might as well spend reading Islamic history, right? So what would you say to somebody like that? And what would you, how would you, add on to that probably?
Okay, so first of all, I'm personally not a fan of the notion of looking at history as like their history and our history.
Very nice.
This notion of like, what is European history versus what is Islamic history? Like you're talking about, Spain was a Muslim country for 700 some odd years. So European history is very closely tied in with what Islamic history is. And then talking with regards to what you were talking about with World War I, that has to be the starting point if you care about modern politics in the Middle East. There's absolutely no way that you can understand the Muslim world today if you don't understand what happened in World War I. And the decisions that were made by people in, conference rooms in London and by people in, tents in Arabia. That sounded very Orientalist of me. Of course, the Arabians were living in tents. They didn't have buildings. But if you don't understand, so I don't want to turn this into like a history lesson unless you guys want that.
You do you, bro. You do whatever you want.
I just don't want to be the teacher from Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
No.
Like, putting everyone to sleep. Everyone's going to turn off the podcast right now.
No, and let me, before you start, the reason why it's important is you said something awesome. You said, in order to understand modern day politics, especially in the Middle East, you have to understand World War I. Right?
Yeah.
So our listeners should understand that. That's why it's very, very important. But go ahead, continue.
Yeah, so World War I, for everyone who wasn't paying attention in history class in 9th grade, which is literally everybody, having been a history teacher for a while. So on one side you've got the British and the French and the Russians. On the other side you've got the Austrians and the Germans. for some inexplicable reason, well, not really inexplicable, but for some reasons that don't really make a lot of sense, the Ottomans joined on the side of the Germans. They thought that the Germans were going to win, and everyone actually thought that the Germans were going to win. They had like the military, powerhouse of Europe at that time. Long story short, the Ottomans got their butts kicked really, really, really hard in the Middle East. So what happens then is that you've got the British, you've got the French, you've got the Russians, you've got European Jews who are looking at the Middle East, and they're all saying, okay, the Ottoman Empire is the sick man of Europe. It's been known to be in decline for about 100 years now at least. So how are we going to divide it up? We're not going to leave this Ottoman Empire intact because there's a lot of symbolic there's a lot of symbolic importance to the Ottoman Empire at this point. The last Ottoman Sultan who really had power, his name was Abdul Hamid II. He placed a lot of emphasis on his role not just as Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, but as Khalifa of the Muslim world. And the British hated that because they were ruling over millions of Muslims in India. So they are not going to be able to manage that Muslim community in India if this guy is claiming to have authority over them. Even Muslims as far away as China and Chad were, they had this kind of a connection to this personality. So long story short, they say we have to dismantle this empire. And what ends up happening is you have this carving up of the Middle East by the British and the French, and a lot of conflicting agreements. They make an agreement with Sharif Hussein of Mecca, who is an Arab leader in Mecca, and they told him, if you revolt against the Ottomans, we're going to give you this grand Arab state, and you can rule over all the Arabs. And of course, he went along with that. And then the British and the French, at the same time that they're making this agreement with the Arabs, they say, all right, we're actually going to divide it up according to how we want into these 4 territories and these international zones and whatnot. At the same exact time, the British are also promising the Zionist movement in Europe, Palestine, after the war. So now the war ends, and they start drawing these lines in the sand, literally lines in the sand. And, when you look at today, so bringing it back to modern politics, like what is an Iraqi, right? Or what is a Syrian? Right? Is it someone who lives within the borders of Syria? Those definitions of identity 100 years ago were very different because those modern borders didn't exist. So what ends up happening, for example, with the case of Iraq, the British draw these borders and they say everyone in these borders is an Iraqi, right? Whether you're Sunni or you're Shi'i or you're Kurdish or you're Persian or you're Bedouin or you're city dweller. And these are people that many of them don't identify as Iraqi. They don't see much of a connection between them and somebody else. Not everybody is even Muslim to begin with. Not everyone is of the same sect. Not everyone speaks the same language. And now you're telling them this is your identity. And the history of Iraq, to a large extent over the past 100 years, you can say it's a history of a country that's really trying to figure out what its identity is.
Who are they? Yeah. Who are we? Exactly. Yeah.
It's a majority Shiite country that has, before 2003, it was ruled over by a Sunni strongman dictator for how many decades. And you've got these Kurds in the north that really don't feel any kind of a connection to the Arabs to the south that really want their own country. And then the 2003 invasion really just kind of inflamed everything. So you can take a look at the 2003 invasion and blame everything on George Bush, and if only George Bush didn't invade Iraq, everything would be better. It's just like, no, hold on. We have to go back 100 years and see what did the British do and the French. Right?
Very, very nice.
Well, explain that Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about is the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Yeah.
This is Mark Sykes and a French guy whose last name is Picot and whose first name I don't remember off the top of my head, who basically get together and they draw this map called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where they carve up the Muslim world, or the Arab Middle East, you could say, actually, because it's not the entire Muslim world that's involved. And if you look at this map, you can easily find the original map online. It looks very, very similar to modern borders of the Middle East. They pretty much followed that pretty well in terms of how they actually carved it up. So, and the funny thing is that this is 2 European guys, Western European guys, sitting in a cafe somewhere or a conference room, a dimly lit. I always imagine it like a dimly lit basement with like one light hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah.
Swinging around like a pendulum.
Yeah, of course. So they're dividing up what the Muslim world is what the Arab world is going to look like, with no regard for what the people in that region actually want, of course, because that would make a little bit too much sense. With no regard for what's actually going to work at the end of the day. So these problems. So actually, an interesting anecdote. If you look at a map of Jordan today, it's a really strangely shaped country. It looks like half of a T-shirt.
Yeah.
It has like a sleeve coming out the right side, and it's got a zigzag on the east. And supposedly, the legend behind it is that Winston Churchill, who in the 1920s was not yet prime minister, but he was working in the British Foreign Office, he was drawing the borders of this new country called Transjordan. And Winston Churchill, of course, as he was known to engage in alcohol every now and then, had a little bit too much that day, and he had trouble drawing a straight line, which is why. And they even call that border Winston's Hiccup. Because
no way, I
yeah.
didn't know that.
I mean, it might not be a true story.
It's
but,
cool though. I'm gonna go with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's really how history works. By the way, you don't actually have to make sense. As long as it sounds nice, it's good to go.
Yeah.
But that just kind of shows like the way that the Europeans carved up the Middle East. Like, who cares? And Churchill even bragged about the fact that he created the eastern border of Jordan in an afternoon one day when he was, had nothing else to do. It's amazing that now, in that region you have a lot of Bedouins. And if you're on one side of the border, you're Jordanian. You're on the other side of the border, you're either Iraqi or Saudi, right? And these are identities that are forced onto them. Whereas, I mean, they're Arab Bedouins in the desert. They're all more or less the same,
Where did the Muslims drop the ball in this? I mean, was it siding with the Germans? Was it not voicing their opinion?
That's what I want to know too. Like, why did even the Turkish...
At what point in history? Maybe it happened much before that, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there's a lot of theories that go along with it. I mean, Ottoman historians, for example, will debate endlessly about what caused the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Was it economics? Was it politics? Was it Ottoman policy towards religious minorities? Was it this? I mean, so some of the theories that get thrown around are the Europeans colonizing the New World, because what happens there is. Countries like France, Spain, Portugal, England, those are the four big ones. They start colonizing all this land in North and South America and bringing over slaves from Africa, and they're bringing over gold and silver from the New World and throwing it into the European economy. The Ottomans were a little bit too far inland into Africa, Asia, Europe to really colonize on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So they don't have any colonies, so they don't have this huge influx of money that's coming in. Before that, the Ottomans were the big dog on the block. I mean, even after 1492, well into the 1500s, the Ottomans are the empire of Europe. So one theory is economic. As trade routes shift from the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic Ocean, there's much less money in the Ottoman Empire. So some of the statistics that are thrown around are like in the late 1500s, early 1600s, there was just like runaway inflation in the Ottoman Empire. Buying a loaf of bread went up like 500% or some crazy number like that. So an empire that has those kinds of problems, that's going to have repercussions online. But you have to keep in mind, this is 1500s still, 1600s.
Yeah.
So this is still 300 years before we see the end of the Ottoman Empire. Other theories are, the Arabs betrayed the Turks and revolted, which they did, but I don't like that theory because there really weren't that many Arabs that revolted against the Ottoman Empire in World War I.
Is there any disagreement at the end where a lot of people say what ended a lot of it, what sealed it, was Ataturk and the Young Turks and that whole movement? Is there even, I should say, a difference of opinion amongst historians in that too? Is that basically what sealed the finishing? You'll
never get historians to agree on anything. You can put 5 historians in a room and they'll come up with 10 different theories of what happened and be fighting against each other. I'm exaggerating, of course. I mean, Ataturk kind of comes after the end of World War I, and he kind of puts the nail in the coffin for the Ottoman Empire. It would be a mistake, I would say, to blame him too much for what happens, because there's a lot of things that are already in motion before he comes on.
That would be giving him too much credit, basically.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
there was a lot of stuff falling apart.
Yeah, that's why I said it was basically what sealed everything, the finishing, basically.
Yeah, it really was.
He would love it if we gave him all the credit for that. He would absolutely love it.
So who is this guy? Who is Ataturk?
So Ataturk is a really interesting character.
Was he Muslim?
Yeah, it depends on who you ask.
Oh.
I mean, his name was Mustafa Kemal. He was a Turkish. He was actually an Ottoman military officer during World War I, from a Muslim family and everything like that. It appears that he was probably atheist or agnostic later in life, or maybe even earlier in life, and no one really knew it. So anyways, after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire is just completely dismantled, you still have a sultan, but Istanbul itself is under British and French occupation. There's really no power that the Ottomans have left. Ataturk kind of rallies the remainder of the Ottoman army, and he says, we're going to fight for Turkish independence. We're not going to worry too much about the Arabs. They got conquered. They're under the British and the French, but the Turkish lands cannot be occupied. by Europeans. So he leads this war of independence in the early 1920s and eventually becomes the first president of
And it was
the Republic of
very
Turkey.
nationalism driven too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Nationalistic driven
That's
too, right?
the very interesting thing about this time period is that you have this nationalist strain that's going through all groups in the Middle East. Arabs, Kurds, Persians, Turks, Armenians, Greeks. Everybody wants their own country that speaks the same language as them. And this is very much a European idea. And it's interesting because if you look at the Middle East today, if you go, for example, to Syria, you'll find some communities that are still speaking Aramaic.
Yeah.
Which is the language of Prophet Isa alayhi salam, right? So they're not Arabs, and they don't identify as Arabs, and they're not Muslim, and they don't identify as Muslim, but they've lived there for, as long as Islam has been there, and then some. In Egypt, you have the Copts, right, who used to have their own language for the most part. Now they speak Arabic. If you want to consider Egyptian Arabic, of course. You might have some thoughts on that.
Sheikh Amr is going to be very upset with you.
Yeah. So there was no such thing as like national boundaries historically. But now all of a sudden everyone's saying, no, the Turkish lands are going to be Turkish and there's going to be no Arabs or Kurds or Armenians in them. And this really is picking up in the 1800s. And the sad part about this is that for the most part, it's a European invention. This is the problem of nationalism is very much a European problem that was, in a sense, forced onto the Middle East and in another sense kind of adopted by the Middle East, which causes a lot of problems. So Ataturk is very much a nationalist, believes in the Anatolian Peninsula and the area around Istanbul being Turkish land, that nobody else should be here. So he kicks out the Greeks, he kicks out the French and the Italians and a whole bunch of other occupiers. And he really turns Turkey into no longer a state based on a religion as the Ottoman Empire was, but a purely secular state. One thing that's like mind-blowing to me is that the adhan in Turkey was put in Turkish. They made it illegal to have the adhan in Arabic because he said, this is a foreign invention. We don't want anything that has to do with the Arabs. So if you're going to want to pray, that's fine. First of all, you should keep it private. Don't pray in public. Because we're a secular state, and furthermore, we're going to Turkify everything. So even saying Allahu Akbar, was not allowed. Even the word Allah was not allowed. You had to say Tanrı, the Turkish word for God.
That sounds pretty cool. Can you say that again?
Tanrı.
Wow. Can you speak Turkish?
A little bit.
Very
Firas.
nice.
Yeah, I'm taking a Turkish class.
MashaAllah. Good for you,
It's a very, very hard language.
Is it?
Yeah. It looks very easy, but it's not.
Is it more difficult than Arabic?
I would say so.
I mean, you're Palestinian. I mean, would you?
Yeah, but I would still. Yeah, I would say if you don't know Turkish or Arabic, Turkish might be a little bit harder.
Why are you learning it? Just for fun?
Yeah, but also no. I want to study Ottoman, Ottoman documents, and you need to do Ottoman Turkish to do that. So you need to do modern Turkish before you can get to
MashaAllah.
Ottoman
Good for you,
Turkish.
man. That's a true researcher.
Yeah.
MashaAllah, man.
Inshallah.
No, that's what I was wondering. I saw that you had some pictures on Facebook. You were in Turkey and everything. I was like, why is
Oh,
that dude in Turkey, man? What's he doing there?
Turkey's beautiful.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, honestly, I've been to Palestine, I've been to Jordan, I've been to Saudi Arabia. The only place in the Middle East where I really, really felt at home was Turkey.
Yeah.
MashaAllah.
And I'm not Turkish. I have no Turkish blood. When I went there, I didn't speak any of the language, but it's just so homey. It's just
Dude,
Wow.
so many people say that, and even non-Muslims say that too.
Yeah.
Like they have favorite neighborhoods in Istanbul.
What does modern day Turkey look like?
beautiful.
I mean,
You
I'm
want
sorry.
him
I'm
to
very
draw a
sarcastic.
painting?
I'm sorry.
No, I think he means does it look like a European country?
Yeah.
Does it look like America, kind of? Or-
I know half of it is in Europe, the other half is
Yeah.
in Asia.
Yeah.
But I mean, just is it considered a Muslim country?
Yeah, I mean, the population is overwhelmingly Muslim. But it's interesting that you see some Turks who are like very overtly Muslim and make Islam a huge part of their identity, and other people just don't identify as Muslim at all, and personally wouldn't believe in God. But the really, really cool thing about Istanbul is that you can go to one district in the city and you feel like you're in the Middle East. It's very much a Middle Eastern city. The architecture is hundreds of years old, and because it's hundreds of years old, there's Arabic lettering on everything. Of course, the Ottoman Turkish language used to be written in Arabic. Modern Turkish is written in Latin. And then you just get on a bus, and 10 minutes later, you're in a very, very, very European neighborhood that feels like you're in Paris, right? And even if you go to the palaces of the Ottoman sultans, you go to Topkapi Palace, which is the original palace built by Mehmet II when the Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 1453. It's very, very, very Middle Eastern. Domes everywhere and calligraphy. And then you go to Dolmabahce Palace, and it looks like it belongs in Paris. It's completely European. I mean, there's just like these huge, gaudy chandeliers everywhere and very Baroque architecture. So it's a very kind of schizophrenic country.
No, it's awesome. You seem very passionate about it, man. Mashallah, man.
I love
make
it.
everything
I
easy
love
for
it.
you. And how long do you estimate? I have another question after this. Just a quick thing. How long do you think you're gonna be able to go to Turkey and speaking the language? In the I don't even know if you're already fluent. I don't know if you're being modest. So I'm just gonna act like I don't know.
No, I'm honestly not modest. I actually asked one of my professors. He's an American who my Turkish professor said his Turkish is better than anyone he's ever met. And I asked him, how long did it take you to feel fully fluent? And he said just learning the grammar before you can start working on vocabulary and fluency takes about 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
It's a very mathematical language.
Is that why you can't really learn as like for instance when I teach Arabic, I teach it like you're teaching like a kind of like a child and start with conversation, not grammar.
Yeah.
Is that approach more difficult with Turkish?
You can't really do that.
You can't learn it without the grammar first.
Yeah.
I see. Wow.
As far as I know, I mean, I'm not a Turkish professor.
No, that's cool, man. You're learning it.
Why do you say it's really mathematical? I've heard Arabic described as that. It's very logical.
You got
Yeah.
You
He's
got
a
the
mathematician, so
and intrigue.
You got me going, man. What's up?
Well, the way that you construct sentences is very structured. In English and Arabic, to a certain extent, you can move words around in a sentence a lot. In Turkish, you do that, you really mess with the meaning of the sentence a lot. And then furthermore, based on case endings to certain words. So, for example, in English, a lot of things that we say, that we add meaning to certain words is just another word, right? So if we want to say someone from Istanbul, we say someone from Istanbul. Mm-hmm. In Turkish, it would be Istanbullu. You just add a suffix onto the word. Mm-hmm. And then you can add another suffix onto the word that adds on possession, another suffix onto the word that adds on, that you're going to a particular place. So if you look at long words in Turkish, they can easily get up to like 20, 30 letters.
I got it. It's
Because
kind of like the FOIL method. It's exactly that. No.
Wow.
That's how I always answer his mathematical question whenever he throws it. It's just like the FOIL method.
Because that's pretty much what people remember from middle school math.
Exactly.
That and the quadratic equation.
Exactly.
Y equals mx plus b.
Gentlemen,
Yeah.
I have a question that's not related to the Ottomans and the Turks. I apologize because in your outline, I've been dying to know about this because I love this personality, Ibn Khaldun.
Oh, he's awesome.
Yes, I love him too. And you mentioned for people in order to get well acquainted with history, they have to get well acquainted with Ibn Khaldun, right? And like his view of history, empires rise and fall due to circumstances beyond control. Islamic history strongly shows patterns of Muslim Spain, the Seljuks, and the Mamluks, right? So out of all the resources that we want to give people through you on how to start history, why Ibn Khaldun? We got the part about the World War I, World War II. Totally understood. Modern day politics depends upon World War I. But of all these personalities, why Ibn Khaldun?
Ibn Khaldun was at once a historian, a sociologist, an economist. I mean, he was everything.
Yes.
And his muqaddimah, so he writes this multi-volume history work, which is like 7 or 8 volumes in most prints. The first volume is the muqaddimah, the introduction.
And that's a huge book.
Yeah, it's not short.
It's not a chapter, but the
Yeah.
Muqaddimah is a big book.
Yeah, it's a volume by itself.
Yeah.
I mean, more often than not, actually, the entire book has not been translated into English, his history book, but the introduction has been. The introduction has been translated into a whole bunch of languages just because the ideas that he presents in there. His theory of history is amazing. And what's fascinating is that a lot of times historians talk about historical personalities and kind of analyze, why did he do this? Why did he think this? With Ibn Khaldun, historians a lot of the time are conversing with him in a sense, right? I mean, he is seen as like a historian himself. He is a historian himself, and his ideas have stood the test of time to the point that, like, you can say, well, I disagree with him on this point, but this point makes sense. But you can't really do that with a lot of other, particularly Muslim historians, just based on the way that early Islamic history was written down by some of the big scholars. So, anyways, so he offers this theory of history, which is fascinating, or this theory of empire that's fascinating. He starts out by saying that every empire has a natural lifespan, like every human has a natural lifespan. And he says the natural lifespan of an empire is a little bit longer than that of a human. It usually lasts no more than about 100 years, he says.
I like this. Keep talking, bro.
And he breaks it down into 3 generations. And he says the first generation generally comes out of the wilderness. and they establish this empire. And they come from nothing, and they're very poor people who now, establish a state, and they establish a government, and they establish order and whatnot. And because of their very strong work ethic, and a term that he uses, asabiya, which I've never seen it translated very well into English, this idea that he's trying to get across of like group feeling. Nationalism is like a modern usage of the word asabiya that I don't think really applies for him.
Because asabiya has multiple meanings. If you want to use it as nationalism, it can be.
Okay.
But it originally is that it can be a false sense of, or a sense of homely feeling, as he mentioned, group feeling, right? And you have to have a reason for that.
Okay.
Yes, but go ahead.
Yeah. So the idea is that when this new sultan establishes his empire, everything is great. Taxes are low because everyone's working very hard, because that's just, that's their nature. They come out of the desert. The second generation now is raised in this palace, right? So think of a sultan that establishes an empire. He comes from nothing. He remembers living out in a tent, like I guess all Arabs, as we said earlier. And then the second generation now is born into a palace. So you have everything that you ever need. Now your father is still telling you, when I was young, we worked very hard and we had this asabiya feeling, and I didn't get this overnight. I had to work hard, like a lot of immigrant families do to their children today, which is why I think it's a very good teaching model, because there's a lot of analogies that can be made off it. So that second generation, when they take over, they're going to be hardworking as well, but not to the level of their father. But the empire is still great. It's still powerful. This is the heyday. This is when arts and culture flourishes. Third generation now comes about, and they are the second generation born into the palace. Their parents didn't work hard for what they had. Their parents are going to tell them, yeah, my parents worked hard for this, but you're a little bit too far removed. So Ibn Khaldun says that at this point, they just are completely enamored with worldly life and luxury and whatnot, and they don't really care much about ruling. Taxes go up because the sultan now wants a huge palace and all these riches and things like that. And at that point, the empire is so decrepit that somebody else is going to replace, and that somebody else is going to be someone that's coming out of the wilderness, and the cycle repeats itself. And what's amazing about Ibn Khaldun is that you can take that model with minor changes here and there and pretty much apply it to almost every single Muslim empire, which is crazy.
And even like even contemporary Western politics, you can see things in there.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of time he gets used for a lot of things that I'm not sure he would agree with. I saw an article recently about Walmart falling into that model of like the first I don't know who founded Walmart, but like they worked really hard, but now it's like his grandkids who don't really care about the company. I'm not sure I agreed with that, but like, I mean, his ideas have staying power.
Yeah. And one thing that intrigued me about him a lot is, number one, he is the father of sociology. In all institutions, they will inform you of that, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. The father of sociology, a politician in his own right, historian. I mean, we have Muqaddimah, and then we have Tarikh Ibn Khaldun, right? And that history book, like you mentioned, some publishing houses, 8 volumes, some 5 volumes, some I think even 10 volumes that I saw in Egypt possibly. And then you have this individual who people don't know about. He's a jurist. He's a scholar at a very high level, of where he was a judge in Tunisia, and he was a minister or assistant minister. I mean, the guy conducted. And then you see his book Al-Muqaddimah. This is a grammarian's or a linguist's dream to use as. Even using it as a scale for language, because a language in that Arabic language is known as. When I was in Mauritania, one of my friends, he told me, and he was very learned in the Arabic language, mashallah, and he told me, he said that there's 4 books that you should know, that if you accomplish these books, then you have specialized in the Arabic language, and one of them was Al-Muqaddimah, which was a sociological historical book. But the language in that book is so strong that if you can understand that book, and if you can teach those concepts without having any help, then you've perfected the Arabic language. Right? Wow. You've got to a very high level. So this guy was a linguist. He was a grammarian. He was a historian. He was a politician. He was a sociologist, psychologist, a politician. This guy was everything. This guy was a very, very valuable commodity to the Muslim world. Very valuable commodity.
Now, is his work all translated, or?
As far as I know, just the Muqaddimah. I'm 99%
because that's the only thing I find of his in Islamic bookstores that are written in English.
Yeah. Well, his history book isn't that great, from what I understood. I've only looked at parts of it, but people have told me that it's not worthy really of being one of the first things that gets translated into English. But
Yeah.
I mean, his muqaddimah by itself isn't enough.
Yeah.
If you want to
and
dive
I think
into
his
history.
aspect of history is not only to be history. It's to I don't even know if he does this by design, but I think he includes all these little deep intricacies, and people may see it as tangents, but that's just how his history is, right? Because he has so many different specialties. He includes so many different things. He'll go into the economy of something and just go off in it, and just people may think he may skip certain things. But yeah, as a reference, it's probably not the best reference to
a lot of
translate.
Arabic scholars throughout Islamic history had that style of writing where they would write about intricate details of society. Ibn Ishaq did that, right? With a lot of the seerah.
Yeah.
I heard like so much of the seerah of his is what is used in everything that we read about the Prophet _'s life. But if you actually looked at his
Ibn Hisham, so that they go unrecognized.
Yeah,
you're right. Like even like I forgot the it's missing me the history of Syria, Tarikh al-Dimashq, right? Over 60 volumes, 70 volumes, some publishing houses, and people don't really know about like that. There's a history book that we still have in the Arabic language that exceeds over 60 volumes. And it covers.
Let me ask a question about that though. For me, I like reading, and I consider myself more of a reader than the average person. You know what I mean? But sometimes it's so dry.
Yeah,
it's really dry. I mean, it's sometimes there's stuff that's interesting. I think wars are pretty cool. I think they're pretty interesting. But then there's a lot of these details that I think are important, but they're just so dry, man. I mean, what do you do? Do you force yourself through this stuff, or do you actually enjoy it? Or how can we as people, learn to, I guess, enjoy this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, even as a history student, you have to read a lot of stuff that's really dry that you don't enjoy reading. Some people just aren't particularly good writers. But that's the challenge is for historians in particular is writing things in a way that people can actually relate to it.
If that's even their point, though, maybe they just want to make something that's a reference that they're going to be remembered by the historical world, right? But that's I think that's a challenge, though.
Yeah, what do you do? Do you just chip away? Do you just tough it out?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to.
I think you really have to have the passion for it, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Is if you recognize the fact that if you get through this book, you will have a much better understanding of a topic that you care about, either for research purposes or just for general interest. You can kind of force yourself to do it. I mean, as a mathematician, personally myself, I hate math, and I wish I could say that when I was in high school, I toughed it out and pushed myself through it. But for a lot of high school students, that's what you have to do. You might not like it, you might not even get it, but you've got to put time and effort into understanding it. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have some kind of a tangible benefit that comes out of it. History is very much the same way. Okay. But a lot of people kind of get discouraged when they pick up a book and it sucks, and they don't like reading history afterwards. There's this one, I don't like calling out authors or anything like that, but there's this one book that was written in India in like the 1920s called like The History of Islam. It was originally written in Urdu, and then it was translated into English. And like a decade ago, I was in Saudi Arabia and I saw it, and I didn't really know much about history at that time. And I was like, sweet, a book called The History of Islam. 3 volumes.
I know which book you're talking about.
I saw it on your shelf, so that's why. So I was like so excited, and on the plane ride back, I'm like flipping through it. I get back and I start reading it. It's unreadable. Like it's completely like it's horrible.
You could only read footnotes just a little bit. Like if you want to learn about a certain subject a little bit, like okay, I get what you're talking about, but yeah, you cannot read it cover to cover.
That's the thing, and from what I understand, the original Urdu is better. I wouldn't know, but it's the thing is that there are certain books that are written in a way that's very kind of fluid, that reads as a novel in some regards, and then other books that are meant for the expert. Yeah. And other books that are just written by bad writers. Some people are excellent researchers and have great ideas, but have trouble, putting, a paragraph on a page that doesn't go 5 pages long.
And I'll give you a small example. As far as like some people, they're very passionate about history. Like Imam al-Bukhari, he has a book called Tarikh al-Kabir, right? Which is the big history book, basically. And he's not writing a book on history, how you and me think of history. He's a historian as far as personalities are concerned. So he writes history about individuals that are in chain of narrations of hadith and everything that you should know about them, right? So even these books on Islamic history, many of them that are like even 60 volumes or whatever, these books talk about all the scholars that were there, what they were known for, all the muhaddithin, the carriers of hadith. So now you have, in contemporary times, somebody by the name of Sheikh Akram Nadwi, right, who's in the UK. And I still remember when I was in Egypt, there was a brother named Junaid Ahmed who was one of his main students, and he was with us in Egypt. And he said, we went to Sheikh Akram Nadwi, and we said to him, how do you memorize all of these individuals that are in the chain of narrations of hadith? How do you do that? Right? Because Akram Nadwi has a book right now that just came out. I think it was 40 volumes or 50 volumes of female hadith scholars from history up until our time. Right? It's in Arabic. Right? And he wrote this book. So one of my friends, he said, how do you memorize these people? He said, do you think it's like Quran? We sit there and we just like sit there and memorize from beginning to end. He said, no, these people have to be your friends. If they are your friends, then when you read it for the first time, you're going to know a majority of it. It's not a chore. It's actually a zeal and a passion that you have, right? So when you want to know about this guy who's preserving the hadith of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I want to know who this guy is. And if he's someone who's very trustworthy, and this name is going to keep on coming in Sahih al-Bukhari, as soon as I know this person's history that's in the chain, I know exactly why he narrated his hadith and what he was known for, which is why he may be narrating hadith that have to do with a certain subject, right? Or because of when he became Muslim. So it has to be a deep-rooted passion, I think, right? And I think the same goes with you. Like, you understand when you pick up a book on history that there's going to be a certain type of fluff in there, but you know how to get past it. And some historians, I mean, you're learning a language to learn history, to learn elements of history. Some historians, they buy a book and they read maybe just like 10 or 15 pages because that's what they need for what they're studying in history. You know what I'm saying? I don't think many historians, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think many historians, all the books they have in history, they read from cover to cover, right? I don't think historians see it that way because there's going to be, let's say if they have a 10-volume history book, they're going to need one volume in one time of their life, another volume later, another volume, right? That's kind of how it works, right?
Yeah.
I don't think like you're going to buy a 3-volume history book, except for maybe the History of Islam one, and read it from cover to cover.
Yeah, right.
And read it from cover to cover, right?
But also, especially things that are written in history, those old books like the ones that Sheikh Hamid is mentioning, those are really references. Nobody really reads them cover to cover.
Yeah, the references.
And on that point also, it's important to remember that the Muslim historical tradition, the classical historical tradition from like 1,000 years ago, 900 years ago, it was born out of hadith studies. So, for example, if you look at one of the, when you think of like the classic Islamic historian, the first Islamic historian, you talk about Tabari, who has this huge, it's like a shelf-long history book. But the way that he writes it, he's not talking about economic trends over time and, reasons behind certain things. He's just writing down everything he ever heard. So for one particular issue, he'll say, well, some people say this, other people say that, other people say that, and then he'll go on to the next issue. He'll never tell you what actually happened, which one he believes. He'll just tell you, this is everything that I heard, which is how early hadith, you're the scholar, so correct me, but from what I understand, that's how it works, right? The early hadith narrators just narrated everything they ever heard, and then it was up to someone else to make
come
sense
and refine everything. That's what the refinery came about. Yes.
Yeah. So
exactly.
So, for example, the issue of the Satanic Verses. Right, I always use this as an example with Tabari. Yeah,
go ahead.
So Salman Rushdie, who wrote his book, how long ago now, about the Satanic Verses, and people say, oh well, there's precedence in Islamic history for the Satanic Verses happening, that the Prophet was inspired by Satan and things like that, and they always point to Tabari, and they're like, oh, see, it's in Tabari. Tabari narrated everything he ever heard, whether it was true or not. It's not a history book the way that we understand history books. And actually, going back to Ibn Khaldun, in his Muqaddimah, he calls out other historians, and he says you can't just narrate everything you ever heard. You have to make sense out of it.
Exactly.
Which is why his history book, actually, he's not narrating every story he ever heard. He says in his Muqaddimah, and I don't know to what extent he actually follows this through his history book, but he says, my goal is to take all the narrations I heard, figure out which one is probably the one that happened based on certain historical models that I'm following, and then put that one in the book.
Yes.
As opposed to just everything I ever heard.
And I'm glad you brought that about Ibn Khaldun, because he was a very bold character, and he has been known to people before him that preceded him that he refuted them right? And it was in a nice way. Like, he was indirectly talking about Imam Tabari, and he was talking about other individuals also that came before him, but he would do it in a very nice way. But he did that, and that's what kind of put him on the map. Like, wow, this guy is actually refuting individuals that came before us, and he's got some good points too, so he kind of took that stigma away of, you could talk and refute people that came before us. You just have to be respectful about it. You can't be bad about it. You can't have harsh feelings or incite any hate, so that's, man, I love Ibn Khaldun, bro.
He's awesome.
He's awesome.
As
soon as you said he's awesome, your face glue. I was like, all right, that's it. He's gonna talk about Ibn Khaldun for a long time.
I could talk about him forever. I mean, the stuff that's in his book is incredible. And even if you're not interested in historical theory, the Muqaddimah has everything. Like,
Yes.
he has.
What's historical theory?
So, like, why do empires rise and fall and things like that? So his theory of the 3-generation empire and whatnot. But he in other parts of Muqaddimah, he just describes what's going on around him.
Yeah.
He describes what the Arabs are like
Yeah.
at his time. He describes the Persians. He describes sub-Saharan Africans.
Yes.
He talks about what's the difference in Islamic education in the Maghrib, in Morocco, versus in the Mashriq, in the East.
Yeah. Exactly.
And he talks about how they study the Quran versus how these guys study the Quran.
Yeah.
It's like fascinating. He also, just because we're on this tangent, at one point in his life, he actually met Timur, who was this Turco-Mongol conqueror. By this point, many of the Mongols
Also
in the
known
Middle
as
East,
Tamerlane.
Tamerlane, or Timur the Lame.
The
is
Arabs
also,
do not like him.
yeah, most people don't. Uzbeks love him.
Yeah.
He's like the father of their nation.
I actually met a Uzbek who came to paint my house, and his name was Timur, and I'm like, it gave me a pause, and I thought about it.
You're not
I'm
going
like,
to conquer my house, are you?
I thought about it, about bringing it up, but then I'm like, nah, this conversation's not going to end well. You might end up raiding my house.
Wait,
walking
so
away.
who is this guy?
So he's a Turco-Mongol.
He's Muslim.
Yeah.
Okay.
By this point, many of the Mongols have converted to Islam. This is in the 1300s. We probably should have mentioned when Ibn Khaldun lived. We never said that. He might have been last week for all anyone knows at this point in the podcast. So this is like mid-1300s to late 1300s. And Timur comes from Central Asia. He claims descent from Genghis Khan. And he just goes about conquering everything. He invades northern India. He sacks Delhi, burns it to the ground. And then takes all that money over to his capital, either Samarkand or Bukhara. I really should know this. And then just starts building these huge, beautiful buildings and things like that. And people go there now and they're like, wow, this is beautiful. But it's just like, that's because, he burned a city to the ground and took all of his stuff. So he was, totally ruthless. Yes, Muslim in name.
But he would say that he's inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like he's bringing like a wrath or a punishment upon the Muslims who aren't, like, kind of like Genghis Khan did. Like he would, the Khans always used this thing where they would always say that we're the punishment of God on you.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just one of those type of diatribes where he's trying to use that Khan tradition where they always try to make themselves look like we're the punishment that's coming because you haven't been praying 5 times a day.
Crazy.
So
Wow.
So when Timur goes to Damascus, the Mamluk Empire, you guys, I guess.
Yes.
yeah, that's where we come. Tell the rescue.
Tell our listeners about the Mamluks. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
So the Mamluks send Ibn Khaldun to Damascus to meet with Timur, and most of the people that are with Ibn Khaldun kind of chicken out of meeting him because he's a very imposing personality, of course. Supposedly, actually, he wasn't very imposing physically. He was called Timur the Lame because one of his legs was lame or something like that, I guess. So Ibn Khaldun meets with him.
No, it's true. You guys are laughing.
Yeah. I know. I'm laughing because the way he said it, it's like, I guess.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah, he had a limp or something.
It's funny for a history guy because he's like, I guess. But anyways, go ahead.
History is really guesswork, anyways, isn't it?
Awesome.
So Ibn Khaldun meets with him, and Timur is telling him, "Oh, so you come from the Maghrib?" Because Ibn Khaldun, lived throughout like Muslim Spain and Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco, like you said. Timur is like, "Man, I don't really know anything about that place. Why don't you put together like a geography book for me, just out of curiosity? I'd like to know, where the major cities are." Where the rivers are and how I can, if I want to, maybe go on vacation to Morocco, how I would get there. Of course, Timur is thinking,
invasion.
I need a guide to invade North Africa. Ibn Khaldun never put that geography book together.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah,
Came through for us, man.
Yeah, seriously. But it's just fascinating his account of meeting this warlord.
That's awesome.
And you've got this scholar and this conqueror who are on polar opposite ends of job occupations. I guess. Like, what do you do for a living? Oh, I conquer India. And their interaction is really interesting.
One thing I find fascinating is, you hear about the rise and fall of, everything out there. I mean, the Egyptians, the Aztecs, this and that. And it still happens. I mean, nobody really learned their lesson. I mean,
that's one of the things that we always talk about when you join a history class. The history teacher will always say, well, why do we learn history, kids? And then the kids reply, to learn from the mistakes of the past. And they all say that in unison. But then nobody
so
learns.
It either means that people aren't reading the history, or it's just kind of the natural progression of things, right?
Implementation.
I would say it's more of a natural. It's a natural progression of things. There's nothing you can really do to stop it. Even the Arabic word for state, dawla, it has an implication of something that rotates, something that's impermanent.
We can't say that word anymore. Firas, you're out of line. We're going to have to mute you out.
But that's I mean, I actually wanted to mention that next, right? So ISIS's name is...
Oh, guys, turn it off.
Shut it down!
He's getting out of control.
Oh, man, I feel left out. I feel left out. What's going on, Doug?
Nothing. We'll fill you in.
Tell me about Dawla.
We'll fill you in later.
So the name that ISIS gives themselves is a Dawla al-Islamiyya.
Yeah.
The
right?
Islamic State.
The Islamic State.
Okay.
And they have this notion of we're going to be the ones to figure it all out, right? And we're not going to be like these previous empires that fell because they weren't religious and their typical rhetoric. So the ironic thing is the name that they choose for themselves implies that they are going to fall, right? I mean, al-Dawla al-Islamiyya, and it's very problematic to even make that statement, al-Dawla al-Islamiyya, because you're attaching something that is impermanent, which is Islam, something that is permanent, which is Islam, to something that is impermanent, which is a state. So if you're attaching the fate of your religion to the fate of something that is going to eventually fall, whether it's now or 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, you're going to have some theological problems down the road, which is one of billions of problems with ISIS, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a lack of intellectualism on their behalf, of course.
Yeah, and willful ignorance too. It seems like a lot of stuff.
Yeah. So I just want to mention that concept of dawla being an impermanent thing. It's something that rises and it's something that falls.
All right. Well, Firas, we're running out of time, but I want to talk about Lost Islamic History.
Yes, I was just going to say that. Don't end it yet. I got to ask him about this. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, tell us what's going on. A little bit about, for those who are new to Lost Islamic History, tell them what the site is all about and your book.
Yeah, so Lost Islamic History is a website that I put together, and it's an ongoing project. I update it with new articles whenever I can, and it was really born out of me teaching Islamic history at a Muslim school, and realizing that I was teaching 30 kids per year Islamic history, and they didn't know anything about Islamic history. I would say Umayyads, Abbasids, Mamluks, whatever. They've never heard these terms before, or if they did, all they know is that they existed and that's it. And I would see these students actually really care about this. This is their history, as much or even more so than American history is their history. And we spend how many years in school learning American history? So I figured, if these kids are benefiting, maybe I'll put one or two things on the internet. Maybe 5 guys will like it or something like that. And alhamdulillah, it's grown a lot since then. So the idea is really to take Islamic history and make it relatable to people. I try not to write in very flowery academic language for 2 reasons. Number 1, people won't understand it, and number 2, I'm not sure I'm capable of doing that.
and that's why I wanted to bring it up. That's why I wanted to bring it up in this podcast, is because many people can pick up history books from awesome historians, and you're one of the awesome historians, trust me. But the thing is that it's not going to be relatable to them. What you've done, what I've seen from your readings and your posts and your website, is you've taken awesome pieces of history and made it very palatable, and you're pretty entertaining in the way you do it too. I like your writing style too, mashallah, man.
Thank you.
More power to you, man.
Thank you.
So that's the Lost Islamic History. What about the book?
Wait, do you have a podcast?
No, I tried doing something like that a couple years ago.
You know
it was
what?
too much work.
Don't worry about it.
We'll take care of you, bro.
You're a part of us.
You're
now.
a part of us now.
You listeners who are listening, you're witnessing history in the making.
Lost Islamic history.
It's now found. Found
Has
Islamic
been
history.
acquired by the Mad Mamluks. We've done the hostile takeovers. Firas is our guy now.
You guys went two more on me.
No, but seriously, we have a million things to talk about. Go ahead and please tell us about your book, because I'm going to buy that book as soon as it comes out. Is it out already? Or
Yeah. It's been out for like a year or two now. Or
cool,
something like that.
awesome.
Yeah.
What's it about?
So it's a general survey of Islamic history from before the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to today.
Oh wow!
Moderately to today. Yeah, I mean.
So you're like the contemporary Bidayah and Nihaya, aren't you?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Wow! Look at this guy, dude. You got to come at least here once a month, bro.
Yeah.
We got to have you on this podcast once a month, bro. Don't worry. We can't pay you right now. But
Are you guys paying yourselves even?
I'm still waiting on my check.
Yeah. So I mean, it's much less ambitious than Bidayah and Nihaya, of course. But it's just a book that the way I put it together, and I hope the way that it's received, is that if you don't know anything about Islamic history, you can pick this up and at least have an outline. It's not meant to be like an academic book that people should be, basing their research off of. Of course, it's based on secondary sources, just trying to take, what history students read, which might be a little bit too much, like you were talking about earlier about, people get intimidated by reading all these history books, and just kind of break it down a little bit. In doing so, of course, things get generalized a little bit and things get kind of glossed over a little bit. So it's not perfect. So don't read it and say, "Oh, this is what happened."
Yeah.
But it's a good introduction.
It's
I think.
an introduction. It is.
Yeah.
It is the muqaddimah of our time, inshallah, for contemporary, and it is your bidayah and nihaya, bro. It's
Yeah,
up until your time.
you're gonna
That's
have to-
exactly what Imam Kathir did.
You're gonna have to tone down your expectations if you're not just there, because it's not that at all.
No,
Dude, don't worry, they'll buy it.
no, they definitely need to check out
Yes.
at least your Facebook page.
For
okay,
sure.
if you can't buy the book, once you see his Facebook page, what I really love about it is that they're small posts.
Yes,
They're
short
not
and sweet.
super deep, and then sometimes you have like a link pointing to an obscure place on the internet where you found something that is super amazing.
Yeah.
Some map or something like that. Some reference to history and Islamic history that you will not come across from anywhere.
You won't.
So this is, if there's one thing you do today, go on Facebook and click like on his Facebook page, Lost Islamic History. You'll find tens of thousands of, hundreds of thousands, so I think, followers.
Follow him,
Yeah.
share him. Make sure you share him.
Yeah, share his page. He's got a ton of information, and make sure you there's also a button on Facebook if you hit like and you say always see on top, so that when his new post comes on, this is what I did to my at least. I made sure I went to his page and I always on top. I think that's a button.
Yeah.
You select that, and whenever Lost Islamic History or the Mad Mamluks update
Yes.
their page, it comes right on top of your
Yes,
feed,
sir.
your
Yes,
Facebook
sir.
feed. So
Where can
make
they
sure
get the
you do
book?
that.
You can get it on Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
or you can get it from the publisher, Hearst Publishers. I'm not sure which one pays me more. So.
Did you
Not that
publish it
matters.
yourself or
No. It's a publisher in England,
Awesome.
which is why civilization is misspelled on the cover. I spelled it with an S.
Miss so.
Yeah, the irony is that the cover is in British, but the rest of the book is in American English. I didn't. Yeah,
That's awesome.
but yeah, you can get it on Amazon. There's a Kindle
Mashallah.
version of it as well.
MashaAllah, good for you, man. Doing good things, man.
Faraz, Jazakallah khair for being here. I mean,
Thank you
dude,
so
there's so
much.
much I wanted to ask, but I mean, just given the time, I don't
He'll
think
be
we
back.
can't.
Sure.
Yeah,
I
I'm
mean,
in
you
Pulse
guys
all
will bring me
over
back and give me a full time salary and everything like that, right? That's
as
the
soon as I get
contract is
one.
being written right now, right?
It's,
Yeah.
but yeah, Jazakallah khair for being here. And how do people get to your Facebook page? What's the title? What's the
It's Lost Islamic History. If you just search it, I think it should.
Yeah,
come
and
up.
he's
Also,
got a
lostislamichistory.com.
Yep.
Yeah, you can go there.
We'll put all that in the description, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for listening. If you guys have any questions or anything you want anything you want to say, really, give us send us an email at themadmamluks@gmail.com, themadmamluks@gmail.com. We also have a Twitter and a Facebook page at